VR's kind of a complicated subject with some interesting history, so here it is, the brief history of VR in 4 minutes. In 1930, a writer by the name of Stanley Weinbaum wrote a book about goggles that would essentially teleport the user into a fictional world where they would be able to feel exactly what the world was like, including the 5 senses, those being sight, touch, taste, hearing, and smell. 20 years later, in 1950, Morton Heilig developed the Sensorama, which did exactly what Weinbaum theorized about in his book. One problem, the device was big and clunky and pretty much just a picture shower that blew you. But don't worry, 10 years later, in 1960, Morton burst through the door with some white powder on his nose and the first ever head-mounted display, or HMD as it would be later referred to. His HMD, however, was the equivalent of strapping a computer monitor to your face and only allowed images to be displayed in widescreen. But don't worry, that problem would be resolved only a year later in 1961 when 2 engineers named Como and Bryan made their own HMD that could look around when the head moved. The US military ate that shit up and ordered a gazillion, but only used the device to view battle scenarios and dangerous situations. In 1965, a man named Ivan Sutherland predicted what today's headsets would be like, and only 3 years later, he and his student Bob Sproul created a CMHMD, or ceiling-mounted head-mounted display for you intellectuals out there. It was the first headset to use computer-generated graphics, however, it had to rely on wireframe technology. Still an impressive leap in technology, but if you couldn't even play Star Fox on there, then there really isn't a point, now is there? But in 1972, General Electric fixed that problem by creating the first immersive flight simulator, which was literally just 3 screens next to each other. 5 years later, MIT made the Aspen Movie Map, which simulated walking around in Colorado. Not that interesting, but still. In 1979, the Vital was made, or Vital for you dicks in the crowd, which was another flight simulator. And okay, at this point I should probably address that tech bros back in the day weren't very creative with their VR inventions, and all collectively decided to make flight sims. In 1982, the SARE gloves were invented, which were the first ever hand-tracking gloves that would be very important in the coming years, which led to the VPL Research Center, who would specialize in selling HMDs and the gloves. In 1986, a guy named Furness made another flight sim, only this time using 3D computer graphics. Then, in 1989, NASA began working on virtual reality to help train astronauts to do some other cool sciencey shit. They called this development Project View, which brung VR into the mainstream. Well, more of the mainstream. Let's put it like this, if the public view were measured in layers, then NASA probably pushed it into the cool idea layer that only the nerds could see. In 1993, Sega announced the Sega VR glasses, which never got released. However, it did bolster the hype for the Sega VR1, which was released in arcades around the globe, aka Japan and the US. In 1995, Nintendo released the Virtual Boy, oops, and in 1997, some VR HMDs were being used for PTSD treatment. 13 years go by and nothing happens until 2010 when the Oculus gets prototyped. That's right, ladies and gents, we're now in the modern age with hot new headsets that computer nerds everywhere are ready to get their grubby little hands on. But they'll still have to wait 6 more years because in 2012 the Oculus Kickstarter is announced, and in 2014 Oculus gets bought by Facebook, when finally in 2016 the Oculus CB1 was released to the public. Indie devs everywhere rejoice and make some games. Problem, there's no big games for the headset and not a large enough player base that's willing to spend that kind of dough on a toaster headcrab, so games don't get made. Solution, make cheaper headsets, which is what everyone tries to do, but it's still a ton of money. This will eventually get solved, but not for another 5 years. In the meantime, HTC announces their HTC Vive, PlayStation announces their shitty headset, and Oculus makes some new variants, namely the Rift S and the Quest. Pay attention to this one, it's going to be important. Windows Mixed Reality is a thing, the Pimax is released for the truly enthused, and Valve decides that your bank account isn't important anymore. Until finally in 2020 when the Oculus Quest 2 came out with the lowest price tag out there, only $300. A bajillion were sold, and now I have to listen to screaming kids in VR chat all the time. Thanks, Facebook. And there you have it, the brief history of VR in 4 minutes.